Welcome by the podcast about MBT group session. Imagine walking into a room where every single one of your psychological defenses is just stripped away in front of a dozen strangers.
Right. Which sounds like a total nightmare for most people.
Oh, absolutely. A complete nightmare. And your only task in that room is to examine the uncomfortable friction that happens when your mind collides with theirs. Today, we have our hands on a really fascinating, raw, unfiltered transcript of an actual therapy group session.
And just to be clear for everyone listening, our goal today isn't to just summarize the plot of what they talked about. We're not doing a recap.
No, not at all. We're going to pull back the curtain on the mechanics of their interactions. We're looking at the emotional undercurrents, the hidden psychological tripwires, and really those invisible forces that dictate how human beings connect.
Yeah, how they trigger each other and how they actually rebuild trust in real time.
Exactly. So to truly appreciate the gravity of what unfolds in this deep dive, we have to establish the specific parameters of this room first.
Right. So this is a mentalization-based treatment, or MBT group, and we know that mentalizing in theory is basically the ability to understand your own mental states and the mental states of others.
Like recognizing that behavior is driven by hidden feelings, beliefs, and desires, right?
Exactly. But applying that concept in a volatile, multi-person group setting is, it's an entirely different beast than practicing it in a quiet one-on-one session.
It really is. The group format kind of transforms the therapy from a reflective exercise into like a live fire laboratory.
A live fire laboratory is a great way to put it.
Because in a solo session, you're just recalling past events, you know. But in an MBT group, the relationship patterns are playing out instantaneously right there in the room.
Right. The participants aren't just reporting on their week. They are actively triggering each other. They're experiencing misattunements.
And they're projecting their historical trauma right onto the person sitting across from them. The group becomes this wild hall of mirrors.
Yeah, and you are forced to stay intensely curious about what is happening in this space between you and the others. You have to fight that overwhelming biological urge to just, react on pure autopilot.
Which brings us to the very unique role the therapists play in this ecosystem. Reading through this transcript, you immediately notice that the two therapists in the room violate almost every single stereotype of a traditional counselor.
Oh, completely. They do not offer comforting platitudes at all.
No, they aren't handing out tissues, and they certainly do not offer solutions to the participants' external problems.
Right. They function much more like regulators of emotional traffic at a really complex, high-speed intersection.
That's exactly it. When a participant's emotional arousal spikes and they lose their capacity to mentalize, the therapists just step in to halt the momentum.
They isolate the interaction. They ask these highly specific, clarifying questions to force the group to examine the raw emotion right in the present moment.
And they gently pull the participants back into a functional mentalizing stance. I actually often think about the mentalizing capacity as a delicate, highly oxygenated muscle in the brain.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, like when you're feeling secure, when your nervous system is regulated, that muscle is incredibly flexible.
Yeah.
You can easily give someone the benefit of the doubt.
Right. Or you can hold space for a perspective that completely contradicts your own without feeling threatened.
Exactly. But the absolute second your amygdala detects a threat, whether that's a perceived rejection, a criticism, or just a feeling of abandonment, that mentalizing muscle is the first thing to cramp up, spasm, and completely fail.
Yeah, the blood just rushes right away from the prefrontal cortex.
You completely lose the cognitive ability to imagine the other person's inner world, and you retreat into this rigid defensive certainty.
And so the therapists in that scenario are like the physical therapists, constantly identifying the cramp and massaging that cognitive function back online.
Which is so crucial. And we see this dynamic tested literally the moment this particular session begins. The transcript opens with this palpable, heavy tension in the room.
Yeah, you can feel it immediately on the page. It stems from a really profound sense of absence. One of the female group members is missing.
Right. And the therapists inform the room that she is struggling significantly with her mental health, and it remains totally unclear if she has the capacity to even return to the program.
The psychological weight of that empty chair just immediately destabilizes the room.
Because an empty chair in a closed therapy group is never neutral, is it?
Never. It represents a tear in the fabric of their collective safety net. It confronts every remaining member with this terrifying reality that the group container might actually not be strong enough to hold everyone's pain.
Wow, yeah. And this atmosphere of unspoken anxiety really sets the stage for our first major interpersonal exploration.
Right, which is brought forward by a male participant who is facing a highly specific practical dilemma outside the walls of the clinic.
So he describes wanting to integrate into a local social club, like a community guild that hosts weekend events and gatherings.
Which is a very healthy step for his own socialization and well-being.
Totally healthy. However, he is acutely aware that the absent female member, the one who is currently in a severe mental health crisis, is deeply involved in that exact same guild.
And he brings this to the group as a massive crisis of conscience.
He does. He's basically asking if he should intentionally restrict his own social expansion, sacrificing an opportunity for his own mental health, just to guarantee he never accidentally triggers her by appearing in her safe space.
And the fear radiating from his words in the transcript is just staggering. He is utterly terrified of becoming the catalyst for her total emotional collapse.
Right. He's operating under this crushing, almost omnipotent sense of responsibility. He really believes that his mere presence at a social club could be the final straw that breaks her.
And what's wild is how highly contagious this anxiety is in the room.
Oh, it spreads instantly. Almost immediately, another female participant echoes his sentiment, confessing that she's carrying this lingering, suffocating guilt regarding the absent member too.
Yeah, she connects this guilt to a really minor friction they had in a previous session. She's irrationally twisting the narrative to suggest her past comments might be the root cause of the absent member's current crisis.
So we are witnessing a collective loss of mentalization here, right?
Yes, specifically in the form of hypermentalizing.
Let's break that down for the listener. Hypermentalizing is when you're just projecting complex, fragile mental states onto someone else without any real evidence, right?
Exactly. They're projecting all this fragility onto the absent member, and then they're aggressively adapting their own behaviors to manage a crisis that they basically invented in their own heads.
And the therapists recognize this immediately. But what's interesting is they don't just reassure the male participant. They don't say, oh, you're not a bad person.
No, instead, they begin by grounding him in the established boundaries of the group. They reference what the clinic calls the supermarket rule.
The supermarket rule. I love this concept. It is such a brilliant, pragmatic anchor.
It really is. The therapist reminds him that while participants are forbidden from arranging private social meetings outside the group, to protect the therapeutic container, they are not expected to live as fugitives in their own town.
Right. If you run into another group member in aisle 4 of the supermarket, the protocol is not to abandon your groceries and sprint out the fire exit.
Exactly. You are permitted to exist simultaneously in the real world.
But the brilliance of the MBT approach here is that the therapists do not stop at just reciting the rule book. Establishing the rule just clears out the intellectual debris so they can access the emotional core.
Right. So the therapist pivots and asks the male participant to investigate the physical tension this dilemma is actually causing him. They push him to map out the worst-case scenario in his mind.
And by doing so, they are actively modeling mentalizing for him. They ask him to imagine a scenario where he respects both his own agency and the absent member's agency.
The therapist proposes this really simple, boundary-focused solution. They ask, what if he just communicates with her beforehand?
A transparent heads-up. Like, what if he tells her his intention to join the club, eliminating the element of surprise, while steadfastly maintaining his right to participate in his own life?
Exactly. And looking at the transcript, this is the moment where I think the listener's own internal compass might start spinning a bit.
Oh, for sure. Because we are so culturally conditioned to view self-sacrifice as the ultimate form of empathy.
Right. The instinct is to say, well, if you know someone is drowning in a mental health crisis, basic human decency dictates you just stay out of their way.
You don't add to their burden. But the therapist's intervention challenges this fundamental assumption entirely. There's a very thin, blurry line between genuine empathy and toxic codependence.
And this male participant is walking right on the edge of it. That cultural conditioning you mentioned is exactly what MBT seeks to dismantle.
How so? Like in a practical sense?
Well, in the mentalizing framework, true empathy actually requires an absolute respect for the other person's psychological autonomy.
Right.
When you shrink your own world, isolate yourself, and sacrifice your joy to preemptively manage someone else's emotional state, you are covertly operating from a place of profound condescension.
Wow. Condescension. That's a heavy word for it, but it makes so much sense. You are deciding, without their input, that they are completely fragile, incompetent, and utterly incapable of managing their own triggers.
Exactly. That entirely flips the script on what it means to actually care for someone. By tiptoeing around her, he isn't protecting her. He is stripping her of her agency.
He's taking away her opportunity to practice resilience in the real world.
Furthermore, he is entangling his emotional baseline with hers, which is totally unsustainable and actively harmful to his own recovery.
So the mentalizing stance requires you to basically hold two truths simultaneously. Like, I recognize my presence might cause you discomfort, and I hold space for that reality, but I also possess an undeniable right to occupy space in the world.
Right. The therapist guides him to see that carrying her emotional baggage is a violation of both their boundaries. It forces him to delineate exactly where his responsibility ends and hers begins.
And this recalibration of responsibility serves as the perfect psychological preamble to the next major interaction in the session.
Yes, we pivot from the anxiety surrounding a member who is absent due to illness to the intense, explosive friction caused by a member who is absent for a completely different reason.
A planned vacation. And this exchange provides one of the clearest, most visceral examples I've ever seen of what happens when raw emotional vulnerability collides head-on with a fortified wall of logical defensiveness.
The catalyst for this interaction is another male participant, and he takes an enormous therapeutic risk here.
He really does. He opens up to the room about how profoundly destabilizing the fluctuating attendance has been for him. He explicitly names the dynamic, one person disappearing into a mental health crisis, and another female member having just returned from a multi-week vacation in Spain.
He describes the severe physiological toll this unpredictability takes on his nervous system, and his ability to articulate his internal landscape here is just phenomenal.
It is. He uses this military metaphor that perfectly encapsulates the disorganized attachment style.
Yeah, he confesses that his historical default setting whenever he perceived a threat of abandonment was to immediately construct a fortress of sandbags.
Right. He says he'd put on a heavy helmet and pick up an M16 rifle. His survival mechanism was preemptive aggression.
If he sensed someone pulling away, he would open fire emotionally. He'd push them away forcefully so he could control the narrative of the abandonment.
He would rather be the architect of his isolation than the victim of it.
Exactly. And the vulnerability required to admit that to the very people you normally target with that defense mechanism, that cannot be overstated.
It's incredibly brave.
Yeah.
But what makes this moment so critical is that he announces he is attempting a different strategy today.
He is consciously choosing to put down the metaphorical rifle.
He steps out from behind his psychological sandbags, turns directly to the female member who just returned from her vacation, and offers a completely unshielded confession.
He tells her that when she leaves the group for weeks at a time, it triggers a deep historical wound for him.
He says he feels entirely unseen, he feels unimportant, and he feels abandoned. He strips away all the anger and just presents her with the raw underlying pain.
Which is the exact behavior the therapy is designed to cultivate, right?
Right. But the immediate aftermath is a spectacular communication collapse.
It's a total train wreck. The female member who took the vacation reacts instantaneously, and she does not meet his vulnerability with empathy.
Not at all. Instead, she throws up this massive, impenetrable wall of aggressive logic.
Her response is a textbook manifestation of a mentalizing failure under stress. She does not pause to process the emotional content of his statement for even a second.
She launches into a rapid-fire, highly detailed defense of her itinerary. She just lists all the empirical facts validating her absence.
She cites her son's recent graduation and the stress of his exam results. She brings up the severe trauma of her mother having recently suffered a heart attack.
She outlines her exhaustive work schedule, emphasizing how rarely she actually takes time for herself, and definitively states that no one has the right to make her feel guilty for finally taking a break.
She actually announces to the group that by providing all this context, she is attempting to, quote, create understanding.
She really believes that if she can just give him enough data points, his feelings of abandonment will mathematically cancel out.
It is a complete mismatch of communicative frequencies. The male participant is broadcasting on an emotional channel, bleeding from an old attachment wound, and she is broadcasting on an administrative channel, submitting a detailed defense brief to a jury.
In the MBT lexicon, you'd say this female participant has completely slipped into what is called teleological mode, right?
Yes, exactly. Teleological mode. For those listening, this is a pre-mentalizing state of mind where an individual can only process and validate physical actions, tangible facts, and concrete outcomes, while entirely losing the capacity to recognize internal emotional states.
So in teleological mode, feelings basically don't exist unless they are tied to a physical malicious action.
Right. Because she did not physically abandon him maliciously, because her physical actions were justified by graduation and medical emergencies, she concludes that his feeling of being abandoned is simply invalid.
This reminds me so much of a classic medical analogy. It's the equivalent of a patient walking into an emergency room with a compound fracture, like a bone visibly protruding from their arm crying out in agony.
Yeah, that's a great comparison.
But instead of administering morphine and setting the bone, the attending physician pulls over a whiteboard and begins calculating the exact physics of the fracture.
Right. The doctor explains the velocity of the fall, the angle of impact on the concrete, and the bone density of the humerus that led to the snap.
And the physics on the whiteboard are objectively 100% accurate.
Exactly. The facts are undeniable. But the factual explanation does absolutely nothing to stop the bleeding or mitigate the pain.
The patient in the ER does not need an education on physics. They need the doctor to validate the severity of the injury and tend to the wound.
And the male participant in this group does not need to know about the mother's heart attack in the specific millisecond he is exposing his abandonment trauma.
No, the timeline of her mother's cardiology report is completely irrelevant to the scared, neglected child inside of him that is currently panicking.
To him, her barrage of logical justifications just feels like she is listing the exact reasons why he isn't worth sticking around for.
Which creates this fascinating clinical stalemate. We have two individuals whose reactions are completely justified within their own internal narratives.
Right. The female member has every right to take a vacation and care for her family. Her defensive posture stems from feeling unfairly accused of cruelty.
And the male member has every right to his emotional reality. His trauma response is genuine and deeply painful.
But when both parties feel fundamentally right and both are locked in a defensive posture, the relationship cannot heal itself. It requires an external mechanism to break the gridlock.
Which brings us to arguably the most compelling dynamic in the transcript, how the room actually mobilizes to rebuild the bridge between these two isolated islands.
And what's amazing is that the intervention doesn't actually begin with the therapists. It starts with the peer network.
Yes, another female participant in the circle, someone just observing the car crash, steps into the friction. She gently but firmly confronts the defensive vacationing member.
This peer intervention is vital because it proves the group has internalized the mentalizing framework.
Right, they aren't just relying on the therapist to fix it. The observing member points out the collateral damage of the defensive strategy.
She illuminates how the vacationing member is so intensely focused on protecting her territory, so consumed with fortifying her right to exist and rest, that she is carelessly trampling over the male member's exposed vulnerability.
She basically holds up a mirror, essentially saying, look, your logic is flawless, but your delivery is crushing the person sitting in front of you.
And once that observation is on the table, the therapists execute a total masterclass in psychological de-escalation.
Their approach is incredibly disciplined. They do not adjudicate the conflict at all.
No, they don't play judge.
Okay.
They do not tell the male member his feelings are an overreaction. Nor do they tell the female member she was wrong to go to Spain.
Instead, they just hit the pause button on the entire narrative. They stop the flow of dialogue, turn to the defensive female member, and ask her the core grounding question.
What is happening inside your body right now?
By forcing her to look inward, they are dragging her out of that teleological mode.
They're asking her to shift her focus from the external facts, the graduation, the heart attack, to her internal physiological state.
And the therapists help her map her current reaction to her historical trauma. They highlight that her compulsive need to, quote, create understanding through over-explanation is actually a survival mechanism forged in her past.
It is highly likely she grew up in an environment where she was constantly misunderstood, unfairly blamed, or required to meticulously justify her existence just to avoid punishment.
So her brain is running an outdated software program. The defense mechanism that kept her safe 20 years ago is now actively destroying a connection with someone who is trying to be close to her today.
Exactly. And after mapping this out for her, the therapists pivot back to the vulnerable male participant. They ask him to describe the physical sensation of receiving her logical explanations.
His articulation of his internal state provides the exact data the female member needs to hear. He describes his physiological tension on a color spectrum.
Right. He explains that when he took the risk to be vulnerable, he was sitting in a calm, regulated green zone.
But the moment she started listing the reasons for her absence, his internal tension skyrocketed into the dark red zone.
He voices the tragic irony of her strategy perfectly. He says, "The more you explain to me why you left, the more utterly alone I feel."
That sentence is the hinge of the entire interaction. It's so powerful. And the therapist then guide the female member toward this monumental shift.
They ask her to attempt something that feels incredibly dangerous to her nervous system. They ask her to drop the shield of facts.
They ask her to stop explaining, stop justifying, and simply acknowledge the reality of his pain without attaching a but to the end of the sentence.
And the transcript reveals how excruciating this is for her. You can practically sense the cognitive dissonance on the page.
Her amygdala is screaming at her to defend her character, to prove she isn't a bad person.
It requires an immense expenditure of cognitive energy to override that survival instinct, but she actually manages to do it.
She does. She steps out from behind her wall of facts, looks directly at the male participant, and connects with his emotional reality.
She admits that hearing about his pain actually distresses her because she genuinely cares for him. She validates that her actions, regardless of their intent, caused him harm.
And the atmospheric shift in the room is instantaneous. As soon as she meets him in the emotional realm, the male participant's anxiety just completely dissipates.
He expresses this profound sense of relief because he never needed her to apologize for taking care of her sick mother, and he didn't need a guarantee that she would never go on vacation again.
No, he just needed proof that his pain mattered to her. He needed to be felt rather than reasoned with.
And if you, the listener, reflect on the conflicts in your own life, with your partner, your colleagues, your family, consider how often this exact dynamic plays out.
Oh, all the time. When someone brings you their pain, how quickly do you instinctively reach for the whiteboard?
How often do you assemble a bullet point list of logical defenses, completely missing the fact that the person in front of you is just desperately asking for their emotional reality to be validated?
The urge to prove we are right often costs us the exact connection we're actually trying to protect.
It is a devastatingly common trap, substituting logical accuracy for emotional attunement. But what happens when the attempt to help someone actually becomes the vehicle for invalidation?
That's a great pivot, because the group session moves into a completely different manifestation of this dynamic, exploring the unique damage caused by quote-unquote sympathetic attacks.
Right. This transition introduces a younger male participant who is navigating a deeply entrenched, highly toxic family system.
He takes the floor to express his ongoing agony regarding his relationship with his father and his brother. He details a pattern of severe emotional invalidation.
Whenever he attempts to assert his needs or express his feelings within the family unit, his father and brother deploy a specific, targeted insult to shut him down.
They tell him, "You're just acting like your mother."
In the context of his specific familial history, that phrase is not a casual observation. It is a psychological weapon of mass destruction.
It's designed to instantly undermine his reality, pathologize his emotions, and strip him of all credibility.
It is their way of saying, your grievances are not based in reality. You are simply genetically predisposed to being hysterical and unreasonable.
And the younger man is just drowning in the pain of this constant rejection.
Witnessing his distress, the pragmatic male participant, actually, the same individual from the first scenario who wanted to join the social club, he steps in to offer guidance.
Operating from his own worldview, he delivers a heavy dose of logical, boundary-focused, tough love.
He questions why the younger man continues to subject himself to this abuse. He aggressively advocates for self-respect, telling the younger man to draw a hard line, push the family's face into their toxic behavior, and sever contact if they refuse to treat him with basic human dignity.
If you isolate the pragmatic member's words from the emotional context, it reads like standard, empowering advice you might find in any self-help book.
Stand up for yourself. Cut off toxic family members. Protect your peace.
Exactly. My initial reaction reading the transcript was to actually agree with the pragmatic member. The family sounds genuinely abusive, and setting a firm boundary seems like the only logical solution.
But the psychological reality beneath the words paints a completely different picture. This advice, meant to be empowering, causes the younger man to completely shut down.
He retreats into this defensive, combative posture against the group member trying to help him.
The pragmatic member's advice backfires spectacularly because it completely ignores the complex, terrifying internal architecture of the younger man's trauma.
The younger man cannot simply draw a boundary because he has internalized the family's abuse. He is harboring this deep, paralyzing terror that his father and brother are actually right about him.
The tragedy of that belief is almost hard to process.
It really is. He is terrified that his emotional needs truly are excessive, burdensome, and pathological.
In his mind, if he were to get angry, assert himself, and aggressively cut them off, he would not be demonstrating healthy boundaries. He would be providing them with the ultimate proof of his instability.
An explosion of anger would just confirm their narrative that he is crazy like his mother.
Because asserting himself feels like proving them right, he is completely trapped. His only perceived option is to swallow the rage, turn the toxicity inward, and continuously beat himself up for longing for a family he can never have.
He is paralyzed by a double bind. If he stays quiet, he is abused. If he fights back, he becomes the monster they claim he is.
And the therapists catch the subtle physical cues of this paralysis perfectly. They don't engage in a debate about the logistics of estrangement.
No, they notice the younger man's breathing shifting, his posture tightening. They intervene by grounding the conversation in his immediate physical experience of receiving the advice.
The therapists ask him to evaluate the incoming communication. The younger man's response highlights the insidious nature of the interaction.
He notes that the pragmatic member is delivering the advice in the most sympathetic way imaginable, with a gentle tone and supportive body language.
Yet the substance of the advice feels like a violent assault on his reality. It forces him into a defensive crouch because it demands he take an action his psyche simply cannot afford to take.
So the pragmatic member, despite his genuine desire to help, has completely lost his mentalizing stance here.
He is projecting his own capacity for boundary setting onto a person who does not yet possess the structural integrity to hold that boundary.
It's like he is trying to forcibly install a roof on a house where the foundation is actively crumbling.
It is at this critical juncture that another female participant pivots the entire focus of the group.
She cuts through the intellectual debate regarding the mechanics of boundary setting and asks the younger man the most grounding, painful question possible.
What do you actually need from your family?
That question halts the intellectualization immediately. It forces the younger man out of the strategic maze of should I stay or should I go, and drops him directly into the core of his grief.
He is forced to confront the agonizing, unfulfilled longing beneath his anger. He admits that underneath all the conflict, he just desperately wants his father and brother to accept him, to see him, and to love him.
He is trapped in a cycle of seeking validation from a source that is fundamentally incapable of providing it.
The shift in focus from the delivery of a solution to the exploration of the emotional reality is the absolute essence of why MBT works.
The pragmatic approach focuses on fixing the external problem. The mentalizing approach focuses on integrating the internal reality.
The pragmatic member was trying to drag the younger man into the bright, harsh light of a solution long before his eyes had adjusted to the dark.
True mentalization requires the endurance to sit with someone in their darkness. It requires validating the paralyzing fear and the humiliating longing without rushing to fix it.
Because if the group simply forces the cut them off narrative, they are effectively invalidating him in a brand new way.
They would be telling him that his conflicting feelings of love and terror are wrong, mirroring the exact dynamic of his family.
You have to validate the fear and mourn the loss of the fantasy family before the individual can build the internal strength required to set a boundary.
The feeling of being deeply, unconditionally understood by the group is the foundation. Once that foundation is solid, the path forward will reveal itself naturally on his own timeline, rather than being imposed by an external force.
So examining these three distinct interactions, the anxiety over the social club, the collision over the vacation, and the paralysis regarding the toxic family, we see that this single hour of therapy is a concentrated microcosm of the human experience.
While the details of the conflicts vary wildly, the underlying mechanics are identical.
The universal struggle is the battle to maintain curiosity in the face of an emotional threat.
It is the monumental effort required to figure out the why behind our reactions rather than allowing ourselves to be blindly piloted by the reaction itself.
It is the daily, grueling work of choosing to put down the heavy armor, stepping out from behind our historical sandbags, and finding the courage to say, I am in pain, rather than screaming, you are to blame.
As we conclude our analysis of this remarkable session, I want to leave you with a framework to apply to your own interactions this week.
The next time you feel the sudden, disproportionate surge of irritation, or an overwhelming magnetic pull to withdraw from a conversation with someone you care about, I want you to force a pause.
Create a fraction of a second between the stimulus and your response and ask yourself a fundamental mentalizing question.
Am I reacting to the words this person actually just spoke, or am I reacting to a ghost from my own past that they accidentally triggered?
Are you fighting the person standing in front of you, or are you fighting a phantom in the room? That level of self-interrogation changes the entire trajectory of a relationship. It is profound to realize how often we go to war with a memory, mistaking it for our partner. Thank you for listening to this group session episode of the MBT podcast. Don't forget to follow us to stay updated on new episodes where we continue to explore what it means to mentalize within yourself, in relationships, and within the group.